This is kind of boring, so I want to add a more interesting oscillator to this. And I'm going to use what's known as the wavetable. So if we just listen to this, it doesn't really tell you much. The good point with the wavetable is this guy, position. A wavetable is basically a sample waveform, right? It goes from here to here. But you select where it plays with the position. So the position now, here's the waveform, it just plays this part. And if I move this, here you can get a lot of interesting characteristics from one sound. In fact, we have quite a list of different waveforms here. This one I really love. It's not glassy. So what I'm going to try is to add this on top of my bass sound. Just to add some kind of interesting hi-hat. But the good thing about this is when I moved it, it sounded interesting, right? When I'm not moving it, it's just static. It's just any other old sound. So I'm going to modulate this somehow. This is where I'm actually going to use the alpha sphere. It sends aftertouch, which means when I press it sends an extra signal. And this signal I can use in various ways. And in Thor, since we have this mod matrix, I can actually just select aftertouch. And in destination, I have every single parameter of Thor, which means I can send controls here to anything, right? So I'm actually going to send it to the wavetable position, oscillator 3 position. It's actually quite fun. This means I have a lot more kind of expression. This works with anything, not just the aftertouch, right? You can send the LFO I used in Polarizer, just the waveform. We have those here too, so you can just send that. That's cool. I just want to give it some vibrato. Finally, I'm going to do the same thing here with the filter. I take this down, but I also want the filter to move with the aftertouch. And again, it's as simple as taking aftertouch. I'm zoomed in quite well, by the way, so it is much easier to navigate otherwise. Filter frequency. Now I have pretty expressive bass sound, right? You can do this, of course, without any control. You can just assign other parameters, so you can assign how hard you play your keyboard or anything like that. The beauty of Thor is that anything goes into anything. You don't need to know what, just try it and see what happens. I'm going to try to record this bass. I'm not using this quite yet, but I'm going to try. A decent loop. I'm going to use this one, just copy it over. Getting somewhere with my track. I mean, now I actually made a synth sound, but of course we have a bunch of preset sounds too. I'm actually going to load up a patch that I really enjoy. A pad actually. This one maybe. I'm going to unplug this for now. Bye. And just use my keyboard. Because I am a keyboard player, I'm not a sphere player quite yet. The good thing here is I can try any sound while I browse it. Kind of like this one most. Basically what I wanted was add some shimmer to this track, right? So I'm just going to record some chords onto my loop. Because you hear the bass and the drums completely overpower everything, right? Any reason we have a mixer, which is good to have, and Gary will talk more about this. I'm just going to check my levels while playing back. It's good and all, but it's a bit too kind of wide and meaty. I want to make something rhythmic, because that's why I used this to begin with. I wanted some movement. I'm going to use another device. It's called the alligator. It's basically a gate device with 3 different channels. If I just select the first pattern and play this back, let's have a look, and you'll hear. It's a pretty cool sound. I really don't need to do much more, but I am anyway. So each of these channels has a filter. High, band pass, and low pass. And if I take them off, you'll hear it's basically the same signal type otherwise. Right? But the filters kind of give the character. I'm going to change the envelope to make it a bit shorter. And then I'm also going to add some of these effects. We have drive with a car, I think that's hilarious. Phaser, delay, and pan on every channel, right? So I'm just going to adjust this a bit. Starting to get more interesting. And you can do a lot here. But I'm also going to add the dry signal. We do like parallel processing. So you can add the original pad sound back in. Because that is what I wanted to begin with, right? I added this pad because I wanted a wide sound. I just wanted it to be a bit more rhythmic, and that's what I set up. But what if you don't like these patterns? We have 64 patterns, and you hate all of them, of course. The other reason is this side. There's always a backside to everything. The reason has been a closed environment is that we need this stuff. This is the fun part, right? You can take anything and put it anywhere, just like I did in Thor, right? It's the same thing. So I'm going to turn off the pattern here and make my own with something called the matrix. Matrix is basically a pattern sequencer. I'm just going to quickly cheat and randomize a pattern. And now this one down here, that comes out the back. Gate CB. You can route this to gate 1. If I play, you see. I have this new pattern, right? I was lazy, I didn't make it, but I'm actually going to add another one anyway. Another matrix. But this time I'm going to change the steps to 19. Very uneven number, right? And this means I actually get a lot of bonuses musically, because they would never go exactly the same, just loop, block, block. Since they're different lengths, it will actually make it sound a bit more varied. I'm going to route this to channel 2. If I play this back, you'll hear that these ones, they don't always sync up, right? I can even change the time signature of one of them, or rather the resolutions of triplets maybe. And of course anything here can be automated, so I just right click this and edit automation. Oh, not that one. You can right click pretty much whatever you see here and draw in something and record it. If I want to change, say, the gate envelope, right? I can just make a channel for it and draw a bit here. I want to start short and go up a bit, and down and up, down, up. It really makes it, again, a bit more organic, right? It moves. So how does this sound in my track? We'll see now. Getting somewhere, and I'm almost out of time. But I mean, this is 15 minutes with me talking and trying to make a track at the same time. I think it's gone rather well. what we think about with reason is that it should be easy to work with. That's number one, right? You should never be stopped in your tracks when you want to make some music because something doesn't work. Because if you do this, the program crashes. That doesn't happen here. Because that would just ruin everything you're working with, right? So this track aside, I have some kind of, I don't even know what I'm going to call them, but some of the things I think are pretty much the coolest in the program, right? And things you might not think about. So how many of you have used Reason 6 specifically? How many of you have used Reason 4 then? Right. So for you guys, there's a lot of new stuff. We had a program called Record, which is now included in Reason. It's just one program, right? And one of the things we're really proud of is, of course, we have audio tracks, right? So you can record your session in Reason. But we also have pretty fantastic time stretching. I'm playing this back. I'm just going to change the BPM quite drastically, actually. I'm going to take it up 40 BPM and maybe take it down 40 BPM. First, let's think about how much 40 BPM is. You tend to not think about it when you hear what I'm going to do.
It's not about all the words they tell you. I know what's right. They say I made all the wrong decisions, but I'm gonna fight. Don't tell me what to do, 'cause I know that I'm done with the superficial truth. Through the fire and the rain, you should know that I'll run just to get by your side. Even if I know that, hey, you're so unbearable. Take me on.
It's just a jump with 100 BPM, like this, right? It does it all in the background with the entire track playing. This is all, I mean, this is what I say, what I mean when I say we want things to be easy. You shouldn't be able to think about tempo, right? You record something and then you go, shit, this should be faster. Then you shouldn't have to re-record it. You just change the tempo. My favorite kind of cheating thing is I'm very bad at guitar. So what I do is I just take the tempo down 20 BPM, play what I should, and then take it up again. Saves me a lot of trouble. And with this, you can also automate it, which I love. So let's say doing a redondo here, just before the chorus, but then they go up way too fast.
By your side, even if I know that, hey, you're so unbearable. Take me on, I'll be waiting for you.
You can draw all this too. We think it's pretty cool, right? And it's gonna take a bit more than 45 minutes. You're not gonna be sad, right?
Oh no.
I mean, you guys will be sad, but I use this, so it's
Yes.
it's a fair deal. So a final thing I want to show you is probably one of my favorite devices, definitely. I'm a horrible singer. I've never even tried it. But everyone else is sadly not the best singer either. For some reason, even singers aren't the best singers. Nobody really knows why. It's not that they're bad, it's just that people expect things to be perfect. And that's because of pitch correction. Since that started getting used, people don't know what a singer is anymore, right? But this guy is a perfect example for someone who probably needs it. I'm going to turn off this Neptune device, and you can hear his singing.
All I want is purple ribbons and oh in my hair, oh in my hair. All I want is purple.
So the final one is really gets to me. So what Neptune is basically a pitch correction device. But it has some smart stuff. First, you can select the scale you want. So in this case, it's just C sharp major, right? Any other note will not be corrected there. So if it's completely wrong, at least it's in the right scale. And we also have the correction speed and how much of his natural sound we want to preserve. So if I just turn this up with his settings, they're quite extreme. It will sound a lot better.
All I want is purple ribbons and oh in my hair, oh in my hair.
And if I get to mess around with these, I can make him one robot.
All I want is purple ribbons
And two, good singer.
all I want is purple ribbons oh in my hair, oh in my hair.
Still sounds natural, right? Because I let him have some of that incorrection. But I'm still fixing it. So that we're very proud of, but even more so, what happens when something is so wrong, it's just, 5 notes off, right? It's just off the charts wrong. Well, luckily, we have MIDI capabilities with Neptune. So if I just make a track for it and select your MIDI to pitch adjust, and actually play his voice. If something is wrong, I can fix it. I'm going to see that I'm in the right octave.
All I want is purple ribbons and oh in my hair, oh in my hair.
You can always override it. And if you're meticulous with your programming, this can sound completely natural. Just one note you change. You can always be kind of an asshole.
All I want is purple ribbons and oh in my hair, oh in my hair. All I want is purple ribbons and oh in my hair, oh in my hair.
Which is good fun.
Excuse me, I haven't used Neptune at all actually.
Yeah.
But could you use it with, say, a saxophone?
Anything that's monophonic is safe game. I mean, if you look at the back, it's just an audio input, right? So, in theory, everything can be put into Neptune. What happens, we'll see. Saxophone probably works good. It's made for voice though, right? So it does formant correction and that kind of stuff. So, don't expect the absolute best results. But try it. I tried it with guitar, it actually works really well.
I love the back of the reason.
I love the back of that. So he actually did this great solo, doing what I just did. Didn't sing that. But you can also send MIDI to voice sync, and this means you're actually just playing copies of his voice, right? So I can add my own much better chords to it.
All I want is purple.
If I play the right device, of course, that helps. Here we go.
All I want is purple.
Sorry, voice synth. I did this yesterday too, because I'm looking at the other Neptune now and doing the settings.
All I want is purple ribbons and oh in my hair, oh in my hair. All I want is purple ribbons and oh in my hair, oh in my hair.
Which is really cool, right? So one final thing before Gary gets the floor is there is a back to Neptune. So one thing you can do, for example, is you want to plug in the arpeggiator.
Oh, ribbons and
which I think is just brilliant. And what's even more fun is I'm just going to copy his lead track, make a completely new document and paste it. Another good part about Reason is it's very easy to paste from document to document because it's on the same format. But I'm going to remove everything but his actual singing. Gone.
all I want is purple.
Probably change the tempo a bit. As you saw, it just adapts, right? When it comes from a Reason document, it knows what tempo it is, so it just changes. And I'm going to take away these two. I just want the Neptune.
Ribbons and oh in my hair, oh in my hair.
In fact, I'm going to turn off the pitch adjust of this. Why, you might go? Well, because at the back, there's fun stuff. And this is what I'm going to use. So here you have CV outputs, pitch and amplitude. And this is for you guys who have Reason 6 and might want some more advanced tips. But just make a Thor. You know Thor can do fun things, but Thor can do even more fun things if you go in and mess around. So I'm going to make a matrix here, quickly make sure it just plays one note over and over again, setting it to 2 steps, and Max is staying here. So what happens now is, that's it. But on the back, I'm going to take the CV output for pitch and route it into CV input 1 in Thor. Means the pitch coming into Neptune comes out as a control signal. And I can actually take this here, source, CV input 1, that's now my pitch signal, and send it to, say, oscillated. Right? I'm going to take down the filter frequency all the way, but instead, I'm going to take the amplitude, i.e. how loud the singing is, send that to filter 1 frequency. And if you want to have some fun, we listen to what happens.
Purple ribbons, yeah.
I'm actually just controlling my synth with any audio, which is a pretty weird thing to do, right? But it's actually good fun. One of my favorite things is to do a guitar synth, just add it as an extra track. So that means, let's say I could take an oscillator and tune it differently. Let's say the multi-oscillator and set it to 5th upright. And then pitch that one, which means I suddenly have more notes. And it's kind of like the coolest guitar pedal you could ever get, right? Pretty nice. I mean, this is the kind of thing reason was, you know, it's all about making music, right? But that doesn't mean we stop you from doing other fun things. If I normalize this, the level 8 and 50 will probably be a bit better.
My hair, blowing my hair. All I want is purple.
You can have a lot of fun, right? The reason it's all about open-endedness. So I'm going to leave the floor to Gary to talk a bit about mixing, which I admit I'm not very good at.
Can I just ask you before you sign
Yeah,
off?
so yeah, I was just going to say,
Everything-
we're going to stop the computer, so ask.
Everything you've done there,
Yes.
that would be rewirable into
Yes.
Cubase 6. And export audio mix down, it would all come through.
Absolutely. So, I didn't show you, but a really lovely thing with our export options, if you want to export from us, is that you can select export mixer channels and even select if you want to export the sense as a separate track, if you want to have the insert effects there, if you want to have the EQ inserted and all that stuff. And the other way, our import is actually, you just set the tempo of everything you want to import and then you can time switch it and everything like that. Yeah, absolutely possible. We're not a rewire master, but if you bring in senses audio, no problem. Any other questions while we change the computers?
With Neptune,
Yeah.
can you use it as a live set?
Yes, the latency is, it depends on what mode you're going for. It has one called low frequency mode. That means it brings up all the low frequencies too. That's if you're doing it for bass, for example. That one introduces a bit of latency, but if you take that off, it's very much doable, yeah. There's also live mode, which does the pitch slightly worse, but much nicer to the CPU, so it's actually made for live use.
So even if you just monitor that, nothing else.
Yeah,
So the latency you just
the latency is very minimal. I can't show you exactly now, but it's hardly nothing. I do that for guitar setups actually when I play guitar. I have an octave doubler using Neptune, because you can put it as a sound effect, for example, and just mix in other notes.
could you use it like a vocalizer where you give yourself a harmony as well? using
Yes.
guitar?
So what you could do is, there's some tricks. It's not made for polyphonic material,
Right.
but let's say you play a saxophone, as was mentioned before. You can actually do sound effects with 5 Neptunes, set them to different notes, and just blend them in, right? Because suddenly you have 5 extra notes of either side, right?
So you can do that every minute.
Yeah, absolutely. Other questions? Come on, it's not done yet. Fair enough. So, I mean, I'll be here the rest of the day too, so if you want to ask something, we can just do so. Take my phone and my order and Gary Bromham.
Thank you. 2 seconds. 2 seconds. 2 seconds. Let's just make sure.
Make sure you take up the master output of the mixer too.
We don't have balance. So. Balance in place. Are you there? Yes.
You have to go back into the audio. Okay, you fix it.
I think. Good. Okay, let's just check we have some audio.
Master output of the mixer. Mixer.
Oh, due to the noise. Good. Okay. Thank you, Matthias. Okay, my name's Gary Bromham. I don't work for Propellerheads, but I've kind of been doing some guest speaking with Matthias. My background, I'll keep this very, very brief because we don't have a lot of time. My background is that I basically grew up on this desk on the SSL. I started as a tape op. Actually, I started as a T-boy. Even lower down the pecking order than that. Started as a T-boy at Trident Studios. I don't know if any of you remember that. So I pretty much started my career on an old E-series, a 4K console, and I worked with loads of people, some good, some less good, ranging from sort of. Actually, can I mention this here? You'll probably all leave the room. I unfortunately did the ill-fated Andrew Ridgeley solo album. I wrote and produced that. Ranging to Bjork and Sheryl Crowe, so I've worked with loads of different people. Towards the end of my career, I also had a room at Olympic Studios. I don't know if any of you ever heard of Olympic, until the cavalry marched in from EMI one day and closed us down. But the last album we did, and Darren and I, we have a mutual appreciation for U2. Last album we did was No Line on the Horizon, which is the last U2 album, which I was lucky enough to work on some of that. Brian Eno actually stole my room, which was great. It was a privilege. It's a good story here actually, because Brian Eno has this obsession with U2. He can't stand them being a rock band, so he spends his whole life just trying to uncreate in a very Eno-esque way and trying to turn them into something else. And I had a sign on my door saying "Knock before you enter," and he changed it to "Rock before you enter," which I thought was quite amusing. Yeah, about 3 years ago, I was asked by Propellerheads to come and speak at their producers conference, and I did a talk about sort of some basic mixing principles, I don't know, sort of side chaining and parallel processing, and maybe talked about the M-class mastering effects. And at the same event, they launched a program called Record, which obviously some of you guys probably had before you, I would imagine some of you had before you upgraded to Reason 6. And as you know, Reason 5 and Record 1.5 amalgamated to become Reason 6. Yeah. What I want to do is I'm going to come from complete opposite end of the spectrum to Matthias. Matthias was working with the devices and probably doing far cooler things than I can ever do. Hey, put yourself up now. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually working with a session. If I just flick over, actually I'm going to have to sit down and do this, otherwise it's going to be tricky here. I'm working with a session that's purely audio, and I just want to really focus on the mixer today, and also just to emphasise the fact that Reason is now, for me, a mainstream contender in the kind of DAW market, if you like. In fact, many things that take me, I mean, I have to confess, I kind of always worked, I did my composition in Logic, and then I would mix everything in Pro Tools, and I've still got a Pro Tools HD system, which I don't use quite as much these days, actually, sadly. But I come from using those DAWs, but one of the things which has always kind of frustrated me is the fact that none of the bits, they're very much kind of post-production tools. The bits don't really tie together, don't really talk to each other. And I suppose for me, one of the great things which I loved was this whole business, because I understand patch bass, I kind of do patch bass. So for me, this was a kind of big sort of a magnet, if you like, towards this program. I also love the fact that the simulation, I won't call it an SSL anymore, I'll call it a simulation of a well-known British console. This particular simulation is actually the 9K console, for any of you that are kind of a real sort of dedicated SSL heads there, which was more of a slightly cleaner SSL, more of what they call the super analog console. A few little things that I just want to, basically just want to go through some little things in this console. I mean, the first thing is really the signal flow for me. One of the things which really frustrates me about other DAWs is the fact that if the plugins, they almost don't interact, they don't really talk to each other, and if you want to sidechain something, you have this nightmare of like trying to go, okay, so am I using bus 23, bus, yeah, and it gets very, very confusing for me. And if I want to switch around maybe a dilemma which you always have with EQ and dynamics, or compression and EQ, is which order do they go in, if you like. It's a kind of chicken and egg situation, if you like. And it's very, very easy for me in here, if I just zoom in a little actually, you can see I can just flip around the order of any of these, and I can put the insert first, if you like, in the channel. Other little things which I've always, it sounds like I've got to gripe about other people's software. You know, when you set the master fader, if you set up your gain structure, if you like, particularly in a minute I'm going to talk a little bit about this guy, which is the bus compressor, which probably is 50% of the kind of mojo sound of an SSL. It's like, we kind of call that the radio button. It kind of makes everything sound, if you like it's on the radio. But one of the most annoying things is if you set your master fader and you're not using it, you don't happen to have an external, if you like, a little monitor device. And you set this up, and the compression's all looking quite good in your session, and then somebody walks in and you accidentally go and pull the master fader down. Propellerheads that have the kind of foresight, if you like, to put a control room, or have a little control room output here. And all I'm doing is I'm using, let me just zoom in a little more here. All I'm doing is I'm sending the master level to the control room output, which in its sense, you know, in essence is maybe in itself is not that cool, but the fact that what I can do is I can do this kind of stuff. With the sends, if for instance I want to set up a headphone balance for my singer, you know, singers, they always want their voice too loud, don't they? They always want too much reverb for their own good, and in many cases, some of the singers I've worked with actually, I wouldn't have minded muting their voice completely. Well, it's very, very easy to set up another mix here. If I just click on the effect send, at the moment I've got that set to 8, so anything I want to send to, if you like, another headphone balance, and I can also put the pre button here. Do most people know the difference between pre and post fade? Yeah? Basically, if I have those pre buttons in, what will happen is my the level that I'm sending off here is totally independent of what's going on with the fader. So in other words, if I mute that or I solo that, then it doesn't solo it at this level here. Okay? Let's play some music. So I've kind of talked to you sort of very basically about what I think about this. The fact that the desk is, or the simulation of the desk is, it's laid out like a proper mixing desk. Okay? Let's just hear a little bit of music, just so we know what we're dealing with in here. Master fader. Noisy. But what I'm going to do is I just want to take you through some of the things which I'm doing in this mix. So first of all, I'm just pressing Option and Command just to set the left and the right locators. Have a little loop section here. Okay, so first of all, let's just take a little look at the bus compressor. Anybody in here know anything about the bus compressor already? Bus compressor is really, as I already alluded to, it kind of makes up probably 50% of what I would call the mojo sound of the SSL. It kind of gives you that kind of, it adds a little width, it makes things a little more punchy, kind of pushes things a little more into your face, if you like. I don't know if any of you guys watch any of the Making Music Month stuff, which Matthias and I both contributed towards last year. One of the things which I talked about actually when I talked about the simulation of the desk was the use of the bus compressor. It's not a religion here. I'm not sort of saying this is the way that it has to be done, because the great thing about using Reason is that, you know, everybody does stuff differently. The way that I would use the bus compressor is I would put it on before I started mixing. And I would do that because what will tend to happen if you don't is the balance of your mix will change. The other thing, which, if I just zoom in a little more here, just so we can see, and one of the things which I tend to do when I'm mixing is I tend to fiddle around a lot. So, in other words, I'm happy with something for 10 minutes, and I don't know whether you guys are the same. Great quote by George Massenburg, I don't know if any of you know it. He says, a mix is never finished, it's just abandoned. I don't know if any of you have ever heard that expression, and that very much sums up a lot of mixing for me. So I'm going to start by changing something, because I'm looking at that and I'm going, that's just wrong. Okay, so first of all, I don't want to see, the needle here is showing me the gain reduction, if you like, on the compressor. And let's just have a little look at this little section. We don't really need to have the music turned up that loud for me to just show you what I'm doing here. Now, the needle really doesn't want to, a couple of people have asked me about this already today. You really don't want to see the needle doing too much. So in other words, if we've got this kind of scenario where, or actually if I take the sidechain out, you can probably hear what's kind of happening there is that the kick drum is sort of dictating what's going on in the mix. You just put that back in again. So probably 2 to 1 as a ratio. I'm using quite a slow attack because I don't want to kind of snag the transients of the song. But on the other hand, I want the compressor to kind of get back again, or I want the kind of gain reduction to come back down again so that it will be ready to grab the next transient. So I'm using quite a fast release. In terms of, people often ask me, they go, oh, so how should the attack and the, well, it's completely program dependent. The only analogy I would make is, in my experience, if you listen to what the snare is doing, the decay of the snare, do you want a snare with a kind of, and I'm not just talking about putting a reverb on, listen to the way that the snare breathes at you in a track. It may be that the snare just sounds too long and the track's kind of, if you like, it's not snappy enough, in which case you maybe want a slower attack and maybe a faster release. Yeah? As opposed to maybe if I was mixing some jazz, I might actually go for a faster attack just to kind of smooth out the initial transients, and then maybe a slower release just to make it sound a little smoother. Okay? As with Matthias, if there's anything you want to ask me as I'm talking, I really don't mind being interrupted. Something I do just want to show here, something I touched on there with this track. Sidechain. Do most of you know what sidechaining is?
No.
No. Okay, sidechaining. Actually, let me take. The problem is we were joking about this last night in the bar, weren't we? We were saying sidechaining's kind of it's kind of got this reputation now of being all about kick and bass, hasn't it? Oh, squashing the bass with a kind of, you know, in terms of the kind of dubstep genre, I suppose that's quite relevant. Another example of sidechaining for me, something I might relate to a little more, a de-esser. Do we know what a de-esser is? A de-esser, if you want to duck the S's on someone's vocal, okay, that's done with a compressor, but it's done with a compressor using a sidechain. Effectively, it's a frequency-conscious compressor. Yeah. So what I'll do is, instead of compressing the entire signal, what I'll do is I just want to compress just a little area of that signal, where the t and the ts, those kind of, or the plosives as people often call them. So that's an example of sidechaining. I mean, there are loads of examples of the way you could use this. My problem here is, if you look at that needle, the kick is dictating what the compressor's doing, which, if I'm doing dubstep, that may be what I want. In this case, I want the track to be a little more kind of linear sounding. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to insert a sidechain, and I'm going to have it respond to, I'm going to kind of take some of the bass out of the sidechain. Okay? Let me just explain how I do it. So if we just zip over to the rack, I may have to just zoom out a little here, just so I can find, and I'm just going to flip the rack around, tab key, and you can see what I'm doing here is I'm taking, probably not the best way of doing it, I'm taking the control room output, probably would have been better to have taken master output. I'm taking control room out, and I'm feeding that into a spider. Have most of you kind of messed around with spiders? It's like a kind of routing device. It enables me, in this case, with this, to either merge or split the signal. In this case, I want to split the signal. Okay, so I want to basically take this source, let me just do that, there you go, it's a little easier to see. It enables me to split the signal, send one, if you like, feed out to what you're hearing through the balance interface, and the other feed is being sent, if I just hover over here, you'll see, is being sent down to this equalizer which I've got below, okay? And then that in turn is being fed into the side chain of the bus compressor. Let me just flip this around, just so you can kind of see how this is working. It's quite a drastic EQ shape. I just want to be clear about the fact that this is, the EQ is not over the track. The EQ is dictating what the bus compressor does. Let me see if, this is a long shot, but you never know, I might be able to view both of these. Okay, so let's kind of see if I can do this. It's a tricky one, isn't it? Trying to view both these. I can just about do it actually. There we go. Just about. A little more of that EQ. Yes. You can't. You'll have to take my word for it that the down at the bottom there, I'm kind of taking some of the low end. So if we just look at this compressor, you can see I'm taking out. I mean, if I just hover over that, almost 2 kilohertz. What I'm doing is I'm being quite drastic with that. I'm doing that purposely so that you guys can kind of see what I'm doing. Maybe if I reduce the effect of that, you'll be able to see what's going on with the bus compressor. So if you just watch the niggle there, if I add some of the bottom end back in again, you can see actually I can make it even worse if I want to. So I'm just lessening the effect that the kick is having. Okay? I'll bring a bit of mid back in here actually. So is that pretty clear with everyone? All I'm doing is I'm using an EQ to dictate what the compressor is doing. Okay? And the compressor, as I've already said to you, is a very big part of this simulation. Okay, so let's go and look at a couple of other things in here. A few people have kind of commented on the fact that it'd be quite useful if we had some grouping going on in here. It would just make life a little easier. We see this on the, well, Mattis probably sees it more than I do on the forums. Now, most other doors, if that was a situation where we didn't have any grouping, we'd kind of be pretty, to be blunt, buggered, and we wouldn't be able to do much about that. Fortunately, because of the kind of open-endedness of the way Reason works, I'm able to do this. I'll just show the kick. I'm just taking the direct out of the kick, and I'm routing that into a 14.2 mixer, which those of you that are using older versions of Reason will still be using as your mixer. Or I would imagine you probably would, maybe the little 6.2 mixer, alternatively. I don't know, I always share this, well, I think it's quite amusing, the fact that the simulation of the SSL as our main desk, I like the fact that I'm using what looks like a Mackie mixer as my sub-mixer for my SSL. Few little things that I'm doing here. So if we just go and let's go and solo out some of these things. Let's maybe take snare top, under snare, just overheads left and right. Important as well to solo the drum sub, otherwise we won't just be hearing the drums. So. Okay, so I'm just gonna isolate these items, and if we just flip this around, just to show you what I'm doing, I'm also taking the master out here. And once again, I'm using a spider. And the reason I'm using a spider is because what I want to do is I want to add some parallel compression, or actually in this case some parallel processing, because I'm not just doing compression, I'm actually adding some distortion. I'm using the Line 6 guitar amp simulation, and also everyone's new friend Pulverizer, which I absolutely kind of adore. And what I'm doing here is I'm taking the signal out from the mixer into the spider, and I'm just feeding two sources. I'm feeding one into this parallel compression channel, which all I've done is create a mix channel, and here the drum sub, which is my untreated, if you like, or kind of squashed drums, if you like. So if we just have a little listen to this, I'll just bring this back into, I'll bring this into the equation now. Just go over to the mixer, and maybe just bring that in. So I'll just take that out. Okay, and I'm now just going to add some of that. Maybe a little too much there. So I'm kind of using this to add a bit of kind of lo-finess, a little bit of attitude into the drums. There's a bit of a kind of myth about parallel processing doesn't have to just be parallel compression. It could, maybe I have emphasised that enough, it could be EQ, it could be anything. It's a kind of dry and a wet setting. I mean, as Mattis mentioned with Pulverizer, it has that kind of almost like you'd associate with a time-based effect, a dry or a wet setting. Moving on, bass. Let's just bring bass into the equation here. So, okay, a couple of little things I'm doing here, which I'm able to do very, very easily with the desk simulation here. If I just flip the rack around, you'll probably be able to see, or some of you will have already noticed that I'm using multiple racks here. So in other words, I've got all my drums in this rack, bass, guitars, and then over here I've got all of my vocals. You have unlimited racks in Reason now. Remember those days where you kind of get a stack of devices and you'd be kind of scrolling down. Although both of us, or we were commenting on, I never used that scroll to device, and I discovered it again by accident the other day, so that's also quite a good thing to do. A couple of things I'm doing here with the bass. First of all, if I just flip the rack around, I'm taking an output from the kick. This isn't rocket science, but it's another example of sidechaining. I'm taking output from the kick, and I'm routing that into the sidechain input of the compressor on the bass channel. So if I just go to the mixer, and we'll just take a little closer look at that. You can see here, on the kick track, what I'm doing is I'm just ducking the bass wherever you hit the kick. It just enables me to kind of allow them to occupy the same space in terms of frequency. Yeah. The other thing I'm doing here on the bass, I'm conscious of the fact that I'm rushing because of our time limitations here. The other thing I'm also doing here on the bass is I've also copied it, or I've duplicated that channel. Okay. The reason I'm doing that is because what I want to do is I want to add some kind of distortion to kind of bring in a little more of the mid-range of the bass, and I also want to add a chorus. If I add a chorus to a bass that's got all this bottom end, it'll end up being very flappy kind of sounding, and it'll sound, you get that kind of feeling that you don't really know where that bass is coming from. So what I've done is I've copied it. Let me just zip over to the rack again, and on the parallel of this bass, first of all, I should mention I'm filtering it quite heavily. I'm using these guys. Low and high pass filters, and those of you who are using Reason 6, to use the low and the high pass filters. When you're learning to mix, low and high pass filters are your get out of jail clause, so to speak. And when I was taught to do, when I was taught to mix, and I didn't really understand, if I'm honest, what I was doing, the hardest thing for me would be to get the bass and the kick working. Okay, and what would happen is you'd invariably get other things, particularly overheads, where you get all this rumble going on. And somebody just said to me, well, just put 100 hertz filter across everything apart from kick and bass. I hasten to add I probably wouldn't do that now, but it's a very quick way of kind of narrowing down the spectrum so that you're just, if you like, you're just working on a specific area. And I'm doing that here with this bass copy. What I'm doing is I've actually got the filter set at nearly 200 hertz, and then I've got the low pass filter at about 4K, which enables me to be a little more drastic, a little more radical with what I'm doing with that processing. A couple of other little things here I just want to talk about. I'm going to stick with drums here as we're over here. The dynamics, I've already mentioned about how I really like the fact that the signal flow is what I'm used to with using the hardware version of this desk. Hi-hat. You know that kind of problem you have when you're mixing, I'm talking live drums here, where your hi-hat is maybe a little kind of limp-wristed, where it's a bit linear, and you want it to you want more of this sort of rather than kind of underused. People kind of go for a gate. We all know what a noise gate is. In fact, we could do with a noise gate today, actually, but there we go. And the way I would have used the desk years ago is I probably would have had these gates in across everything to get rid of exactly what we're hearing here, maybe. But the other function of the gate is an expander. Do we know what an expander is? Compressor takes loud and soft and makes the difference less. Expander takes loud and soft and makes the difference more. So we get this kind of effect. If I just zoom in here a little. On the hi-hat, I'll just take that threshold down so you can hear round about that point. You can hear what I mean about that hat. It doesn't really have much attitude. As soon as I start to do this, the hi-hat is kind of, if you like, ticking a little more. Actually, if I take the expander out and we go to gate mode, you'll probably be able to hear that. Maybe if I... There we go. Around about there. Okay, so that's just conventional gating and expansion. Do I have time for a couple more things? Just.
One.
One more thing. Okay, one more thing. Okay, this, I want to talk about this because I think it's quite cool because it kind of connects together what Matthias and I, or what Matthias did with what I'm doing here. Let's take this little synth part here. It's around about bar 11, I think. Let's take this, and I'm going to easy. Sorry. Okay. Yeah, this little synth part down here. Let's just zip over to the mixer. I'm just going to solo this. Okay, so it's a bit static. What I want to do is I want to make it kind of move around in the stereo spectrum a little. So I'm just going to zip over to the rack. Yeah. I'm just going to open up the channel here so I can insert something into the insert path there. I'm going to create a matrix pattern sequencer. I'm going to hold down shift when I do this so that it doesn't auto root. Let's just zip over here, it's a little easier to see. Flip the rack around, zoom in there a little. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the curve out from the matrix pattern sequencer and take that into the CV in for pan on the channel. Okay? Then I'm just going to flip this around. I'm going to change the matrix pattern sequencer so that I'm viewing curve data. And because we're in a massive hurry, I'm going to cheat. I'm going to control or right click, and I'm just going to create a randomized pattern. That in itself, it's a little bit better, it's moving around a little more, but one of the cool things about the way the CV works on the back here is we can have either a unipolar CV output, or in this case, as I'm dealing with panning, bipolar would probably be more relevant. So I can get this kind of... Okay? Key thing here is the fact that I can take almost the two schools here. We're taking very much a kind of what I would consider to be more of a conventional kind of MIDI treatment, and I can bring that very, I mean, I could, for instance, take that maybe into the sidechain input or something. So there's some very kind of cool things I can do, integrating the two methods of working in Reason, if you like. As Matty said, we normally spend an hour each talking about this, so it's really hard to kind of go through a whole mix. All I've done is, I suppose, if I get one thing across, I would like to emphasise that I think that this for me is like some of you use Thor or Neptune. This for me is like a device, and it should be. And the fact that I can do I mean, we didn't get a chance to talk about it, but if I want to bring these low and high pass filters into the signal path of the dynamics, it's kind of one click. I already mentioned to you about changing the order of the plugins. I really would encourage you to kind of explore this and think of this as a device and as a kind of almost like another instrument in Reason. And I'm kind of, for one, very, very chuffed that they actually took the decision to simulate the workings of, in this case, a well-known British console. Sorry, that was a bit kind of rushed, but hopefully you got one or two things out of that. I'm also happy to take some questions.
Yeah. So if you want to ask us any questions, you can do so while you're here, and then you can also do so when you're here.
Yeah, just to say, in that you get a hell of a lot going on. How's the CPU usage of the computer?
No problem at all. And that was, I'm glad you asked that question because I wanted to kind of emphasise the fact that this is a serious DAW now. And one of the things I didn't get a chance to talk about was the fact that you've probably seen all this kind of, it's a sort of sales pitch, all this hype about Pro Tools 10. It now has a 64-bit summing mixer. Record 1 had a 64-bit summing mixer. And you may have found when you use, we'll call it other rival DAWs, that you get loads and loads of tracks in there and all of a sudden the sound gets kind of crunchy and it starts to sort of fall apart. One of the things which I found is great with this is the fact that the signal kind of you get the separation that you would expect maybe from analog summing, dare I say it. So, I don't know, did I answer your question? I suppose, yes, I can run fairly extensive sessions in here.
Other questions?
Yeah. Is there any such thing as like bad practice with mixing? You get into like bad habits with it, like if you don't know what you're doing.
Yeah, it sounds bad, it's bad.
Yeah.
I suppose there's a few basic principles. Gain structure is important. Namely, I try not to have all my faders up in the. I try not to see. The problem you have is when you're working with digital, there is no kind of there's less character in there, okay? So therefore, you need to leave some headroom. I mean, luckily with this mixer, you don't need to leave as much headroom as you would in other DAWs, but I suppose the first most important thing I would say is gain structure is very important, so not everything overloading. If you've got a channel overloading and you then go and add 6 dB of 2K, that's 6 dB of distortion basically. The only other thing I would say, mixing bad practice, in my experience, is mixing in solo is quite dangerous. And I know because we all do it. Sure, we need to do what I would call not microscope, I can't think of the word because I'm surgical. He knows my word. Surgical kind of adjustment, maybe, I don't know, acoustic guitar that's got too much, that scratchiness on. But to start with mixing in place, because the whole basis of mixing is balance. Yeah, it's all about balancing things. They're just 2 tips. You'll leave here and I'll go. Actually, there's one that's far more important than that. Yeah.
Ross, you're interested in balance, maybe you could explain clip safe.
Yes, I can.
Are you okay doing it? You just. Well, whatever you want.
Can I take the computer because then it's faster?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's bring the master pages down.
So basically, I haven't talked about balance because we don't have unlimited time, right? But if you come over here later, I can give you the full run through. The one thing that's super interesting is the clip save. And clip save, it's basically a way to have signals not clip, right? That's pretty much it. The easiest way to have signals not clip is to set your levels, right? That's step 1, right? But there's always those moments when you're playing something, right? And you really get into it.